The director of the Asia Studies Center at the Henry Jackson Society, Matthew Henderson, joining us from London. So even though we aren't entirely sure of on the contents of this law, what are some of the practical changes that we're expecting to see take place across Hong Kong?
Well, I think the first thing is that this is a law written and invented and created in China according to the pattern of Chinese laws, which are not something that has been voted through a legislature and democratically elected people have agreed to. It is simply something written by the party to promote party agendas and imposed on Hong Kong, ignoring the existing system and thereby breaking down the wall that has kept Hong Kong free from the way that law is used on the mainland. This in itself is an absolutely irreversible and dreadful change. The second thing, as you say, is what it will mean in practice. And as you say, while we don't fully understand the detail, it seems very clear that virtually any action taken by anybody which appeared to be undermining the authority or criticizing the authority of the Chinese Communist Party could be an arrestable offense and in some cases carry very heavy sentences. This means that a phone call you make to your grandmother, frankly, might get her into terrible trouble. So This is the end of freedom of speech, right down to that artificial intelligence Orwellian nightmare situation where the Chinese technical intelligence apparatus can collect people committing crimes that weren't crimes before because Hong Kong enjoyed the freedom of speech. This is an utter transformation of the scene in Hong Kong.
All right, so can we expect to see any reactions from the international community, namely the United States? We know that Trump obviously has been vocal against China generally and has spoken out in support of the protests that we saw in Hong Kong against this security law.
The trouble is, if you beat up on Hong Kong and Hong Kong's special status, you're harming the thing that you're meant to be trying to protect. To be quite honest, there are not an awful lot of options. One might think more in terms possibly of Magnitsky-type rulings against people who are clearly abusive, but again, it's very difficult to do that without bringing down more of this kind of pressure from the north. So more important, I think, it is to unite all of us in the free world and speak against it now. The Europeans are thinking like that. Obviously, in Britain, we are. People with substantial expatriate Chinese populations, like the Canadians and others, will be thinking very, very hard about what their responsibilities are to their citizens or people with dual nationality who live in Hong Kong.
Speaking of that,
together.
Well, what I wanted to ask you is if we're seeing locals, Hong Kongers, actually beginning to move out of the territory. Are they scared? Are people actually fleeing?
My understanding is that already, for example, the number of people applying to emigrate to Australia has gone up very significantly. And no doubt similar patterns will be seen elsewhere.
Now, how do you think that these laws are going to actually change Hong Kong's stature as a business center, as Asia's business center?
Well, I think the way that Hong Kong operated, the thing that made it so marvelous, was it was somehow in two worlds at the same time. And people from the West who were a little bit wary about the possibility of getting into difficulties on the mainland, nonetheless used Hong Kong as a safe platform from which to do their business and to launch their investments. And that worked extremely well. And similarly, Chinese companies who weren't exactly fully connected to the world of free trade could work through Hong Kong and the gears would mesh. And this was an absolutely splendid thing for both sides. Well, quite frankly, that special status, that special sense of being protected and safe from a Western perspective, that is being wiped out. And this is one of the biggest blows to that there's been so far. And there have been many others I know, but this is the worst. So from that point of view, if you had a choice between investing in Singapore or Tokyo or Hong Kong, which would you choose now?